Our character is what sets us apart.
Who we are when we think no one is looking.
The bad can quickly overshadow the good.
But both will still remain.
So the good thing about the Bible is it always reveals the good and the bad. So you hear the good characteristics of people that did well, like they did awesome, and it's like, yay, good work. But then you also get to see the characteristics of people who did poorly. They didn't finish well. They might have started, but they didn't finish, or they goofed something up catastrophically along the way. It's good for us to learn from both types, where God doesn't just say, here's all the good without the bad. No, God says, I'm going to tell you all about their lives and ultimately how God redeems it and how God is working through history to bring about his desired outcome. We see that in the scriptures. So we've been going through the list of biblical characters, and today we come to a guy named Solomon. Solomon, now, what we know about him is quite a bit. Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. Now, if you know a little bit about Bible history, David had an affair with Bathsheba. They had the first kid, that kid died. God said, that kid's going to die. So now they have a second child. His name is Solomon. Now, Solomon grew up under this kind of environment. So we grew up, imagine that, growing up under King David. King David is the most revered king of all of Israel. Solomon grew up in this house of opulence. That would have been his world. He grew up watching David, his father, lead armies and point out nations and deal with all of this conflict and everything that happened. Solomon would have been there. He would have been very young, but he still would have seen it. Solomon also would have been privileged to watching his older brother Absalom, half-brother Absalom, try to overtake the throne and kick out David from his own kingdom. It's very likely that Solomon went with David, Bathsheba, and others in disgrace out of the city that his stepbrother Absalom was trying to overthrow, kicking out King David. So Solomon grew up in this environment. So he understood what it took to be a king. He understood what it took to be a leader. He saw the good and he saw the bad. Even though he was young, he still observed it. Solomon actually wrote many of the Proverbs that we have in the book of Proverbs. He wrote the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. Anyone ever read that book in its entirety? Okay. It's like, forgive the term, but it's kind of like Bible porn, if you will. Like they talk a lot about stuff in there that's a lot of references that you don't get if you're younger, but you get it like, oh, what are these melons he's referring to? And what kind of fruit is that? Well, good luck, parents. But he wrote that. It's in there, and we have it to read it. I mean, God put it in there. It's describing this love relationship between a husband and a wife, and it's a good thing. But that came from Solomon. Solomon, and I'll share why maybe that's a significant thing in Solomon's life later on. Where David wrote a lot of the music, Solomon wrote a lot of the wisdom literature that we have in the Old Testament. He wrote that. But now Solomon, when he's young, he's taking over the king from David, and now he's a young man, not much older than a boy. And he is going to step up and lead this great nation of Israel, that it's the strongest it has ever been. It is unified. And he has to step up and lead it. This is not a democracy. He is to be the king. And this is what he prays. You can see this in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 14, but I'll read it on the screen too. It said at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. So God spoke to him in this dream at night, and this conversation to him was real. Ask for whatever you want me to give you, Solomon answered. You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne to this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant, he's referring to himself, king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. So he's admitting humbly, I don't know how to lead. I don't know how to lead this nation. I don't know how to do this. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for a long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as your father David did, or David your father did, I will give you a long life. So Solomon asked God to give him wisdom. He longed for God to give him wisdom so that he could govern the people righteously and effectively. You know that you still have wisdom available to you when you pray. You can ask God for wisdom and he will give it to you. A lot of times you think, what? I didn't. No, you can pray and ask God for wisdom, and God will give you the wisdom you need. Jesus himself says this in Matthew 7 and 8. He says, ask and you will be given, and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. And this is not just big things, it's all things. Parents, you could say, Lord, I don't know how to change this diaper. Can you help me? God will give you wisdom to do it right. You can say, God, I have a problem with doing these math things. Will you help clear my mind and help me to do it right? God will give you the wisdom that you need. Sometimes we think we only have to pray for wisdom for the big issues, but it's all issues. It's having all these issues. God, I'm having problems with my relationship with my spouse or my child or my adult child. And God will give you the wisdom that you need. We just don't pray. We don't ask for wisdom. But God says, no, you should ask for wisdom. And God blessed Solomon with peace on all sides during most of his reign. Unlike Saul and David, Solomon wasn't always fighting with his neighbors. And sure enough, one day, Solomon's wisdom was put to a test. Really is a tragic story. There were two women, both had young infant children. And at some point in the night, women used to sleep with their children right next to them for feeding purposes and others. And these two women were sleeping, and the one woman rolled over and suffocated her child. The child died. But before the morning came, that woman took her now deceased child and exchanged it with another woman who was very close to her, same room, and she put her dead child near the other woman, and she took the live child with her. Well, in the morning, the woman wakes up, looks at the kid and goes, this child's dead. And she looks over at the other one and says, that's my child. And the woman who's holding the live child, who really was her child who had died, said, no, this is my child. Your child must have died in the night. Well, the mother knows which child is hers. And so they got into a big feud about it, brought before the king, and they started both getting very vocal. This is my child. No, this is my child. It's not her child. And the king says, enough. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut this kid in half, and each of you can have half of the child. It sounds cruel. But then the woman whose actual child it was says, no. You take the child. And what she's saying is, I would rather have the child be alive and raised by you than to have a dead child at all. And once that was revealed, Solomon gave the child to the rightful mother. And people were in awe at his wisdom. Queen Sheba actually came down to visit him because his wisdom had gotten out to others in the land. Just think of it like ancient TikTok. Nowadays, you listen to really smart people that are on TikTok, he keeps going, wow, this guy's really smart. No, look at Jordan Peterson, look at so-and-so. And his wisdom was so good that it had gotten out to other areas. It's now the Queen of Sheba came and she wanted to listen to him. In 1 Kings 10 says, Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, and the attending servants in their robes, the cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed. He was so smart, she was overwhelmed. She came with questions, and he provided her answers. And these answers, would help her to be a better governor and queen in her own province. One of the most important things that Solomon did, he built fleets of ships. He had chariots. He had building projects. In fact, he had so many building projects that he actually drove the nation into bankruptcy. I'll talk about that a little bit. But one of his most important, probably the most important task that Solomon had, was Solomon was charged with building the temple. God had told David, David, you will not build the temple. There's been too much violence under your reign. But your son, Solomon, shall be the one who builds my temple. Now, the temple was the place where God's presence dwelled in. Back in the old days with Moses, Moses put up a tent of meeting, it was called, outside of the rest of the people, and that's where the presence of God dwelled. In a literal sense, the presence of God dwelled there. It was this on-earth reminder that the presence of God is always with them. And the presence of God moved along in the Ark of the Covenant, and wherever that would go, they would erect the tent over it. And now God's Ark is supposed to come to its final resting place in the temple. This temple was to be built by Solomon, and Solomon built this temple magnificent, grand, gold overlaid. It was beautiful. In fact, I'm going to be taking a group to Israel here October 15th. If you want to go, let me know. But we're going to Israel October 15th, and you can see the western wall, many of which the stones that are there are massive, almost as big as the stage. The stones that are there are ones from Solomon that he built. And on top of that, the temple was built on the western wall. There's a flat spot on the top, and the temple was built on there. And the temple was magnificent, and it held the presence of God. Solomon was tasked to build this, an incredible blessing, and that certainly was a balcony moment. But Solomon also had basements. His biggest basement, and the one that ultimately led to his not finishing well, was his lust for women. Now, God had told him, you should marry a woman. That's good for you. But Solomon's like, I'll just take that as a suggestion. These are my words. You won't find that in the Bible. I'll take that as a suggestion. We know this because Solomon went on and married 700 wives. And he had 300 concubines. A concubine is essentially a sex slave or sex worker or a wife without true wife benefits. So he had 1,000 people attending to his human physical needs. Many of these are political alliances, whatever. But can you imagine how hard that was to try to run a family with that many wives? It's my birthday. Who are you? He goes, hi, Daddy. What's your name again? Joey? No. Peter? I don't know, whatever. Next kid? Like, how would you do that as a father? And these wives were not Jewish. They led him astray. They were not Jewish at all. And they pointed him in the wrong direction. They built temples to other gods, and they worshiped other gods. And God says the first thing he has in the Ten Commandments, there shall be no other gods before me. And Solomon just kind of dropped that. And instead he had all kinds of wives, and they worshiped all their own gods. Now, these gods were gods that they would make of stone or wood, and they would set on the shelf or the mantle, and they would put candles in front of them or incense or whatever else, and they would pray to this rock or this stone with an image of something on it, and they called that a god. That's what an ancient god is. Was it real? Well, I think a lot of them were demons that had revealed who they were, and they created these little shrines for them. But Solomon, not only did he tolerate that, he funded the building of these temples. And he funded some of the temples of the worst gods imaginable, the gods that were completely opposite of the Lord Jehovah, the loving and gracious and merciful God. It was truly his basement. In 1 Kings 11, 1 through 8, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Why? Because they looked nice and they smelled pretty. It's his downfall. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about what the Lord had told the Israelites. You must not intermarry with them because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. My friends, this is why it is so important to be equally yoked in marriage. Do this on the front end to make sure that you are equally yoked. It's much harder to do later on. Be equally yoked. If you're looking to get married, be equally yoked on the front end. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. When he built a place for Molech, Molech is a prominent Old Testament. There's a god that you read about in the Old Testament, and it's Moloch. I really believe it was demonic. Moloch demanded child sacrifice. Children were literally sacrificed in front of this idol, Molech. And Solomon, this great man of God, had come to such complacency in his faith that not only did he allow it, he actually funded the temple in which this took place. That's a tragic fall from where he started. A tragic fall from where he started. I asked myself, how could such a wise man make such foolish decisions? How could a wise person who started off so wise, how could they make such foolish decisions? They started off up here. Everything was handed to them. They prayed for wisdom. God gave them wisdom. And then how could they end up here years later? This is like 30, 35 years later. How could you end up here? Everything was so given to you, and now it's like it's slipped away, and now you're at a point when children are being sacrificed to the god Molech. That's the exact opposite of being a godly person. I think there's lessons here that we can learn. First, when we seek God with all of our heart, He will be found. We need to seek God with all of our heart. That's for you personally. You need to seek God with all of your heart, not just part of your heart, not just in intellectual knowledge, but seek the very presence of God with all of your heart. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, one of my favorite Proverbs, it's the one that I have inked on my arm here, was actually written by Solomon. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him and He will make your path straight. I fully believe that as we submit to God, He will make our path straight. And here's the cool thing, if you're off the path, as soon as you submit to God, God will bring the path onto you. He will direct your way again. You need to seek God with all of your heart. Second, the spiritual life is a marathon and not a sprint. It's a marathon and not a sprint. It's a marathon and not a sprint. Just because you invited Christ into your life and got a Bible and signed it with a date doesn't mean that you're done growing. You don't sign it, put it on your shelf. I did this. And set it somewhere else. It's not like you graduate college, get the certificate in the mail, and post it somewhere on your wall of fame. You don't do that. The Christian life takes growing, continual growing, where we're learning, we're growing closer to Christ. We want to grow closer to Christ. So in my life, I'm not a finisher. I'm a mostly finisher. So whenever I do things, I mostly finish them. You might call me an 80%er. but I'm not 100%er. Like I'll mow the lawn, but I won't trim it. Or mow the front lawn and trim it, but not the backyard. Or I'll unload 80% of the dishes in the dishwasher, but leave 2 forks. Or I'll wash most of the dishes except for the ones I don't want to wash. I'm an 80%er. See, for me, it's 100%. I just shaved off the line and moved it closer so it fits my life. But I'm not really a strong finisher. I'm a mostly getter done. When it comes to Christ, you can't just mostly finish. You can't just start well and then fade away. I have a question for you. I want you to take out your smartphones and take a picture of this on the screen. And here's my question. As you pull out your phone, you take a picture of this. It'll take you to, we're going to do a word picture. If you're online watching this, same thing. As this goes up, you see it on your screen. It is live here as well. So whatever you put in will show up there as well. And here's my question. What have you started well and at some point you walked away from? So what have you started well and at some point walked away from? As you're giving your answers, I'm going to give you some examples. I cannot tell you how many weddings I have done where I have had 2 people in front of me say that I will love you and cherish you in good times and hard times, on the mountain and in the valley. And 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they are no longer committed to each other. They started really strong, but the ways of life, the complications of life, the lack of communication, now they're 2 roommates trying to figure out how to get back together, or they simply get a divorce. A lot of people start strong and don't finish well. So I ask you today, right here and right now, whoever you're with now, no shame, guilt on the past, but whoever you're with now, will you honor that commitment and follow through to the best of your abilities? Will you do that? Will you follow through strong? For years, I used to go to Snap Fitness, walk on the treadmill, and then I had my knee replaced, and then I didn't go to Snap. And I just did life. Wondered why I gained weight. Gee, go figure. Sit on the couch, eat, or exercise. You're probably going to gain weight if you sit on the couch and eat. Who knew? 'Tis a mystery. And a couple weeks ago now, I said, no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work out. And I stopped making excuses. So I started walking on the treadmill again, even though it hurt. Interestingly, I had plantar fasciitis on my heel. That's a long word for means painful heel. I started walking in pain, and that's pretty much gone away. I can't explain it other than I'm using my left leg now more, and it feels better. But it's something that I started and I stopped, and now I restarted again. See, I believe that just because you started something and quit doesn't mean you can't pick it up again. Your marriage might not be good. It doesn't mean it can't be better if you try. So what have you started well and at some point walked away from? And the words in the middle are the ones that have the most hits. Diet seems like a lot of people here get the diet thing. Started well. I mean, at breakfast, I was committed to eating egg whites. But by lunch, I had a double cheeseburger, a Big Mac. Like, no, we didn't make that one. Cleaning, school, friendships, working out, eating well. What else am I seeing? Certification, praying, dissertation, schoolwork, my mental health. You started out strong on mental health, and if for whatever reason you maybe got in your own head or you got out of routine or didn't come to CR anymore, let's celebrate recovery on Friday nights. Addiction, mowing the lawn. I would be with that person, whoever put that up there. Home projects, dishes drying. There's some fun stuff in here, but there's some pretty serious stuff too, isn't there? Some things that we knew that we, beyond the simple answer stuff that we did really mean to do well, and we just haven't done well. We started strong. Then we slipped. We slipped. Don't quit reading the Bible. Don't quit praying. Don't quit going to a small group. Don't quit gathering together. The Bible calls it koinonia, for the fellowship of the believers. Don't quit being a part of a church. Don't do that. If you do move, get involved in another church. Don't quit being a part of a church. That's important. Don't stop worshiping. It's important. Don't stop learning. That's important. See, when you stop learning, when you stop kind of following through in your commitments, you get complacent. When you get complacent, you start to make compromises. And when you make compromises, you sacrifice your values. You lose what matters most. Let me read that again. When you get complacent, you make compromises. When you make compromises, you sacrifice your values, and you lose what matters most. Don't get complacent. If you see areas where you are getting complacent in, you need to shore those up and say, I'm not going to get complacent in these areas. See, when you get complacent, you make those compromises, or you put yourself in compromising positions. And Solomon, although he knew God, he knew God's ways, he really went after the lust of his flesh, and he stepped closer to this group of people than closer to God, and ultimately he ended up further away from God than he anticipated. It was a series of decisions that cost him really his integrity with God. He got complacent. He made compromises. Growing closer to Christ is a marathon, and you run that race until you see Jesus. You run that race until you see Jesus' face. That's it. Never quit. I've seen many people, and I have a number of people in my life they're older saints, way older. I mentioned my mentor who was here last service. He's 83 years old. He's mostly blind, but he still mentors me. And to see him finishing strong, he's in not the end of his life, but he's not running any marathons anymore. But to see him finishing strong and wanting to do well, I want to be like Frank. I want to do that. I want to finish strong. I don't want to get complacent. Because if you get complacent, you make compromises. You find yourself in a place you never wanted to be and you shouldn't be. And then you ask the question, where's God? God says, I've been here the whole time. Where are you? And you go, I don't know. I got complacent. Don't get complacent. And third, you can intend on following God and still seriously wander. You can start out with great intentions and still seriously wander. This is what Solomon wrote in 1 Kings 8, and he wrote it with great intentions. He was totally serious when he wrote it. He wrote, may the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. This is a moment of dedication, huge moment. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. Oh, if Solomon just would have listened to what he wrote. But he seriously fell away. He seriously fell away. He's the one who wrote this proverb. Proverbs 22:7, which reads, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Proverbs 22:7. Solomon, in the end, ended up borrowing a ton of money from other neighboring countries to fund his massive building projects that he had spent the nation into debt. Wealthiest man in the world spent the nation into debt. Sounds familiar with America? Now we borrow money. Wealthiest nation in the world, we're borrowing money from China, Japan, and other countries to service our debt. Where's the wisdom in that? Solomon was told not to marry women from pagan nations, and he did anyways. And they led his heart astray. They led his heart astray. The Apostle Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 15, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Bad company corrupts good character. So I have a personal question for you. Do you have anyone in your life right now who's corrupting your character? Do you have any influence in your life who you just think about it for a few minutes and go, they're probably not the best. See, people are like Legos. You either have 4 pegs or 6 pegs or 8 pegs, but once those pegs are full, meaning your relationships are full, they're all full. Like you can't have any more relationships because you just can't be that close to 200 people. You can have a few good friends and then a lot of acquaintances. And my question for you is this: the friends that are in your life, however many pegs you have, 2, 4, 6, 8, however many pegs you have, how many of them are good friends? And how many of them actually are not real good friends, but they're holding the space of someone who could be a good friend in your life? And if so, what are you going to do about it? When you think it comes to your friends, I'm going to ask you one last question, and it'll give us another word picture. It's a bleat question, so take your phone and take a picture of this and go back to that same survey, or just go back to it, however you do it. And one or two words, why is your, quote, friend a bad influence on you? Just one or two words. Why are they a bad influence on you? Maybe because my friend is a gossip. Whenever they hear something, they want to tell me everything. What else is it? A lot of answers here. Cheaters, drugs, manipulative, don't follow through, violent rhetoric, works too much, alcohol, bad words, addiction, peer pressure, relapsing. ABS, absence. Would that be the word absence? Don't follow through. Number one is still gossip, right in the middle. Alcohol looks like number two. Drugs look like number three. Manipulative, certainly in the center too. Here's what this tells me. In one simple question, we have a lot of work to do. Maybe you need to screen your friends again. See, anyone can pick up an average friend. It takes a lot of work to pick up a great friend. Because great friends are hard to find and they're difficult to keep. But you're better off having one great friend than three acquaintances that really don't know you or that lead you astray. They will make you or break you. And we see this with Solomon. We see it with Solomon. I want to encourage you to log in. When you get some good friends, you log in. You just log into that relationship. You log into it. You plug in. You get plugged into God's will for you. You do what God has in store for you. And maybe if you've messed it up, like you know that you messed it up, the cool thing is God has a reboot button. He just pushes it like doo-doo-doo, and he reboots it for us. That's called grace and mercy and forgiveness. When we screw it up, God hits the reboot button. That comes when we are transparent before God. We strip off all the pretense. We hit that button and God reboots us and says, okay, I'm going to put my will in front of you again. Start walking in it. God gives us that opportunity. Some of you might need to weed out your friends. Some of you started strong, but you're finishing weak. You can change that. Just reboot. Reboot and see what happens. Reboot, because if you're not dead, God's not done. God still has things in store for you to finish strong. So you start strong, you finish strong. Even if you started weak, you can still finish strong. You're here. You're not dead. God's not done. And I believe that right now in this world, we need Christians who are willing to step up for their faith and to point people towards the living, loving God, not towards some idol or radical philosophy that simply doesn't work, but point people to Jesus. God, help us to stay, to follow you. Help us to live in your ways and according to your word. God, help us to reflect on our own lives and the characters that we let in who have influence and space in our head. The people who we spend time with. God, we learn from Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived certainly seemed to walk away from you at the end of his life as he followed his wives' gods. We don't read much about him following you. We just hear about the rise of all of these other gods and their power and influence. And after he died, the kingdom that was once so great was torn into two nations, not to be reunited for another 1,000 years. Help us today, God, to bring you glory, to choose our friends wisely, to seek your will daily, and to honor you always. In your name we pray. Amen.